So this is my daily routine. I just did a 30-minute run. I came home, showered, ate something right after work, ran, come home. Now I'm about to do a martial arts bodyweight workout, solo drills. I just did some of my personal, private, individual training that I don't share here because it's stuff that I'm working on and stuff that I don't want everyone else to know about. And I'm about to do the martial arts workout and then some yoga and some reading and then a quiet seated meditation to wrap it up. And I might not do all that. Let's see. I might just do the martial arts and the yoga and then wrap it up because I'm tired and I'm running behind. I don't want to do this right now, but I make a commitment to do this every day, so I'm going to do it every day. So let's see, I've been listening to my motivational stuff all day, so I kind of want to just put on some audiobook, especially in case I don't get to the reading later on. So I've been focusing on the Russian Revolution and the writings of Lenin specifically. So I kind of want to do that again. But let's see. Well, yeah, I'm going to go back to my basics and what's relevant for us today in the USA that's also a little bit shorter and more motivational. So here we go. Shit.
We're asking a question with this session. The question is, what kind of party are we building? And this is based on an organizational resolution that is circulated through the ranks. It's essentially intended to be an instrument in your hands for sharpening our understanding of our mission, of what we are doing with this party that we founded a year ago, with the intention of gathering the first 10,000 Bolsheviks into our ranks. And we understand that that recruitment target, that drive, the first 1,000 and the first 10,000 is really just a stepping stone for creating a mass party. What we want to do with this document and with this discussion is understand more vividly, how is this party going to grow? How do we intend to proceed from where we are today to a mass point of reference, to bringing the RCA to the status of a household name? What type of organization is it? What is the nature of a cadre organization? What is the nature of Bolshevism? Really, it's opening the door to broader questions. Understandably, a lot of people want to have a very concrete, a very practical response to this. One of the comrades in Ventura, California, submitted to the portal a little report that we published in last month's issue of The Communists. It said, people often ask us, what does the party do? Comrades might be tempted to answer with a list of organizational points. We attend weekly meetings, study Marxism, go to protests. Instead, I tried to provide a vision of our strategy to overthrow capitalism. At our current stage, we're recruiting a layer that is already drawing advanced conclusions about the need for communism and revolution. We're building a network of Marxist cadres throughout the US, skilled revolutionary propagandists and agitators who will form the nucleus of a mass communist party. I used recent examples, BLM and the Palestine Solidarity Movement, to explain why we need a clear leadership and a program to succeed. As we get organized, revolutionary ideas will be a bigger point of reference in future mass movements, and we need Bolsheviks in every key workplace, neighborhood, campus, and union, starting with you. The comrade said, everyone I explained this to was ready to give their contact information, and one even asked me point blank how he could become one of the first 10,000 Bolsheviks. Said he would sign up for dues when he got home. I think this is a model response. And what we wanted to do with this document and with this session, understand more deeply what is the entire strategy, because if we can see the strategy clearly, then everything else will flow from that. And I think the United States has a very impatient, sort of pragmatic temperament. I remember having a small group of comrades in one of our first iterations of a branch back in California, in the small town, rural Northern California that I grew up in, having a meeting about revolution. And it just so happens we were on the high school campus, sidewalks right here. One of my cousins walks by, sees us. Oh, what are you guys doing? And I'm trying to get him to go away. And I said, look, we're having a meeting. Oh, well, what's the meeting about? Well, it's about revolution. And his response kind of sums up what people think when you say that word, is that, oh, do you need guns? We said, not at this stage, thank you. But a lot of people, and I would say the vast majority of people, the vast majority of the left, people who want to have a revolution, having that goal doesn't necessarily give you a clear understanding of how to arrive at a force that's capable of making that possible. And I think that's the nature of Bolshevism, is getting to the heart of this thing. It's always been a difficult thing for people to understand. How do you build the right kind of instrument? It's a very modern question. This question was answered for the first time in this book, What is to be Done? And I think this is the book you can read over and over and get more and more from each time that you read it. Admittedly, it's not easy to read the first time around. It assumes that the reader is swimming in certain waters. It's written for an audience of Russian revolutionaries in 1902 who understand the recent history of their movement, the debates that are raging. It's a polemic. But once you understand, once you get to the heart of what's being argued, all the content is there. Everything that you need in order to understand what it's going to take for us to build this kind of party, to build modern day 21st century Bolshevism, is contained in Lenin's argument. And what was happening at that time was that the revolutionary movement was boiling up. It was raging. The number of people that wanted to overthrow the Tsar were it was a human tidal wave, and they were rushing into the revolutionary movement. In fact, the Tsarist prisons were overflowing with revolutionaries, and Tsarist prison cells were a sense of a cadre school. It was a university. You get locked up for 5 years, and there's not much you can do except read and write and think. And a lot of cadres got their education not in a very pleasant setting, but in a pretty effective one, after all. Lenin was one of these. He was arrested in 1895, 1 year after moving to St. Petersburg, and spent the next 5 years in Tsarist prisons and in exile camps. And I think you can imagine that he was basically cooking this up. What is to be done was a product of that long period of thinking about what the movement needed. But every time the Tsarist police would come and carry out raids and sweep away one layer of leadership, another wave would pour forward, and it would just keep growing. The problem is there was a very low political level in general. You had a network of discussion groups, but you didn't have any kind of professionalism. There was no central force to coordinate it. And so Lenin could understand that you needed to bring this thing together, you needed to concentrate it and give it professionalism. He was fighting against primitive methods, against amateurism, and he understood something that nobody else really did, at least at a degree that no one else really did, is that if you want to give it that hardened core and professionalize a force like that, that's not an organizational, administrative, technical task. That is a political task. It's an ideological task. And what that means is the step you need to take is the step of training cadres deeply and thoroughly in revolutionary theory. Now, we can put the important information, put the bottom line up front. That's what we need to do today. That is the one key to our strategy from which everything else flows, to raise our political level, to train cadres, to train hundreds and then thousands of cadres. That is the only way for us to get to 10,000, but not just to grow in numbers, but to grow in quality, to become the kind of force that can actually wield influence and be a factor in the situation. Understandably, a lot of impatient young leftists don't like this answer. And they didn't like it at the time Lenin put it forward either. They called him, well, they didn't use the word theory, bro, but, and they didn't say theory is elitist as such. Actually, they probably did make that argument. But they said that he was overrating ideology, that he was obsessed with literary, intellectual work, that it would be better if revolutionaries focused on concrete issues, practical material demands, make it realistic. They had a high regard for spontaneity. They said, this is what's happening spontaneously. The workers are moving. We should just be supporting them. Essentially, they were arguing to tail end the movement of the working class. And Lenin fought against this severely throughout what is to be done. The first chapter is all dedicated to this. You need to sharpen, and you need a high level before you can unite. He said, in order for us to unite, we need firm lines of demarcation. You need to recruit people around a theory and around a program. That is the thing that you're recruiting people to. And if you do that from the act of uniting people around a single worldview, and I think we're making progress in this room. I think we have a single worldview represented in these ranks and in the RCA today. We've come a long way. If you do this, certain things will flow organizationally from that. If you have people that think like Marxists and they have the same method when they're analyzing events, if they have a shared understanding of the mission they're trying to fulfill in history, then it creates a certain mentality, and you get iron discipline. That's a voluntary revolutionary discipline based on commitment. And that's the way that you fight amateurism. These methods that you had, basically a lack of coordination, a lack of agreement, people rowing in different directions. If you want a force that's powerful and yet flexible and agile, something that's steadfast, that's not going to break apart when it gets tested under strain of events, then you need people. You need to build it out of a special material, and that's people that understand history, how history unfolds, the laws of history, and their role in that process. And that's exactly what the Bolsheviks achieved. In a sense, what is to be done is like the mission statement. In Russian, что делать? It's like what to do. It's like, here's what you do. That's what he was laying out. 15 years later, they completed the mission. 15 years late, separated 1902 from 1917. And in 1913, a few years before that victory, this is how a Tsarist police reported the impact of the Bolshevik cadres. He said, the faction of Leninists is always better organized than the others. This is an internal report, obviously. Stronger in its singleness of purpose. They're more resourceful in spreading its ideas. Its circles are scattered throughout all the cities. They're the most energetic. They seem capable of tireless struggle. They're constantly organizing. That's because they had a shared ideology. It's the political clarity that created that kind of effective organization. He also explained that the role of the party is not to tail end the working class movement, but to raise its sights, to raise its horizons, to show the way forward. We're not here just to support from the back ranks. We're here to try to explain with clarity, here's the way forward, this is the way, and try to win leadership on that basis. So how do you achieve this result is the question. I think many revolutionaries would probably like to have a well-disciplined, solid organization. But again, there wasn't clarity as to how to arrive to this thing. A few weeks ago, I went to a branch meeting in Brooklyn, and we had a really good discussion about this document. Comrade Laura was there and made a good analogy. Said that capitalism is like a massive wall that needs to be battered down. And you think about the mentality of most people who are anti-capitalist, they want to batter down the wall, and they hate capitalism, and they see with an urgency, the world is burning, all these people are suffering, we need to batter this down. But they don't really think what it's going to take, so they go straight to the wall with their bare fists, and they just start hammering, and they eventually get burnt out. And the Bolsheviks are those in the crowd that are like, let's take a step back, folks, this isn't working. We need to have an instrument that's suitable for battering down a massive wall like this. And that means we need to step back from the wall and start building it. And here's a construction site over here. It's going to take a long time. It's not going to be easy, but this is the only thing. A massive battering ram that the entire working class can hold on to, and then we're going to be able to batter it. So let's go. And then you try to recruit people to this effort, and some people still don't get what you're doing, and they're like, okay, well, you're saying we should abandon the wall. We can't do that. This is urgent. People are suffering. People have immediate needs right now. You want to go have this abstract construction project over here. We don't understand what you're doing. This is basically the debate that Lenin was having with the revolutionary movement in what is to be done. And so the short version is, he also said, what is the practical step that we can take? A press. You need media. You need a way to package ideas and organize people around that, so you can get on the same page that way. If you have a place where you're producing a stream of analysis, producing theory, producing reports, and it's not just written media. In our time, we have podcasts as well. We have YouTube. We have Against the Stream. We have, how many watch Against the Stream every week? Look at those hands, Fred. Let the International Center know that. Well, maybe that has something to do with the political unanimity we have in the party. It's nourished by weekly input. This is what Lenin was talking about. You need a way of getting people on the same page. That's what he was trying to build with Iskra. People said, oh, you're dogmatic. and you're too literary. And people say the same thing. Oh, the Trots, they have papers. They write articles. Well, they didn't understand it then. They don't understand it today. And we can leave those critics to their methods. Our methods are working pretty well so far, I'd say. We can look at the question of what is a cadre organization in general. And we've often done this in the form of analogies. There are multiple analogies. It's not just the military analogy. The comrades at the center know that I've been doing a bit of a rabbit hole into military structures, and I'll get into that, but it's not the only one. Anytime you have to have large numbers of people mobilized suddenly to achieve something, you need cadres. Anytime you need large numbers of people to come and respond to an emergency and get something done, and they need to be directed by a force that's already thought through, how do you direct what needs to, what is it that we actually need to achieve, and how do we go about it? You need cadres to be the leadership of that massive operation. Think of any kind of emergency. You have a natural disaster, an earthquake, a flood. Things need to be done. You need people mobilized. You have an epidemic breaks out, a pandemic. The CDC has its cadres. They actually have a pretty thorough explanation for their personal how to roll out a cadre. And a cadre, by the way, it means framework. It's French. A cadre is an individual part of this structure, or it could refer to the structure as a whole. So don't get confused. Sometimes you can talk about a medical cadre, and that's talking about the members of this unit. But what is a cadre? It's a special organization, and it's small, and it's tight-knit, and it has the ability to become massive. That's a pretty cool feature. And the ability to become massive very rapidly comes from certain qualities that the small group has. It's the level of expertise, the level of training, the level of professionalism and discipline. It takes a long time to basically make in concentrate the ingredients that you need on a massive scale. The concentrated version needs the ability also not just to be professional, disciplined, well-trained and educated, the ability to impart information out into a larger structure. Why framework? Because it's the outline of a much larger organization that can then be filled out. So you could think of it like a skeleton. You need a structure that's sturdy, that's not going to break, that can uphold other tissues and organs. A framework can be built out. You can think of it also as a foundation. There's a lot of different analogies. You need something solid, and then you can have a mass that rests upon this. So in the case of, like, say, a wildfire, in 2020, among all the other apocalyptic events, the western half of the U.S. was on fire, if you remember. And they mobilized 85,000 personnel, not just fire departments from all over, but all kinds of agencies. The National Guard was out there. You had all kinds of law enforcement, medical responder units. And think about 85,000 people is a pretty good-sized army. They need to be fed, and they need somewhere to sleep sooner or later. And they need a lot of supplies, and they need fuel and trucks, and you need to have decision-making to purchase things, and you need and the supply line has to be established very quickly. So when something like this happens, you have what's called an incident command system, and you have a general staff that's established. And the leadership of every unit, you have a department for organization, for planning, for logistics, for finance, is going to be someone that has been thoroughly prepared for this emergency, that has thought through all the contingencies, and that knows this is the resources we have, here's the plan, if this happens, we're going to do this. And they start rolling out a response, and they're going to recruit members of different agencies, and each one, it's a very thorough division of labor. They figured out decades ago that if you don't have this figured out, you can't really do it in the midst of an emergency. It leads to chaos. You don't know who's responsible for making decisions, who's in charge, and who's going to report back, and how is it going to get done. It all needs to be figured out. So you have cadres in place, and they're going to lead the response. Any incident like this typically is a question of mobilizing, you deal with the issue, and then you demobilize back to the cadre. You don't need a standing army to respond to the next wildfire. In a sense, we're trying to mobilize and not demobilize. We're trying to build our forces and not lose forces. But in the history of the revolutionary movement, sometimes you have, naturally, a massive filling out of the ranks of a revolutionary party, and then after a revolutionary defeat, look, 1905, the Bolsheviks, there was more than one Russian Revolution, right? It was 3. The first one was in 1905. The Bolsheviks were not much larger than our forces today. In the course of that revolution, together with the Mensheviks, they all came together. huge events, right? Now the workers are looking for a revolutionary. They're pouring into the ranks of the Bolts. They grow to 150,000. I mean, that's a massive expansion. After the revolution's defeated, I mean, now demoralization sets in. Anyone who joined but wasn't part of the general staff, wasn't professionalized, hadn't studied Marxism, didn't really have a long view of history, is now also demoralized, and the thing disperses. They basically reduce back down to a tiny core. That was a very difficult period. But that's, you see, there's a cadre, there's a basic organizational feature that's happening beneath the surface. Well, this is what happens when you're responding to a wildfire. This is how armies are raised as well. And I do think that the military analogy is worth examining in detail. It's not just a metaphor. It is a cadre organization, and it's probably the most thoroughly worked out. I mean, they've had centuries to figure out how do you structure things in order to convince large numbers of people who have no military experience to rapidly get trained, become part of a unit, follow orders, and risk their lives. I mean, that's kind of a logistical issue, and it's not easy to do. And what you have are officers, and you have enlisted personnel who can make this happen. That's the cadres of a military. And the whole military, if you look at it as a big, vast, you could look at an army and just say, that's, okay, what's an army? That's a huge number of soldiers, and they're all wearing a uniform, and they have an arm, and they're ready to go into combat. Well, on the surface, that's what it is. In reality, it has a structure, and the structure is that's going to be permeated by sergeants. Sergeants are an enlisted soldier who's been promoted to the rank of a non-commissioned officer, and every unit is going to have sergeants, and they're going to have other ranks as well. And this is the way that troops are trained, assigned to a unit, mobilized, and then sent into battle. Look at the Civil War, for instance, to see how we also have this expansion of the troops, right? The beginning of the Civil War, you have the North. They have 15,000 enlisted soldiers, and that was in the standing army, and around 1,000 commissioned officers. They grew in the course of the war. If you count up all those who enlisted into the Northern Army, from 15,000, right? They grew to 140-fold growth to 2.1 million on the basis of those initially 1,000 officers, and then other people had to be trained rapidly to become officers. The whole thing, time is of the essence, right, when you're faced with a war. The Confederates did something similar. They had just 750 officers, and initially mustered 15,000 troops and continued to build from there. Over the course of the war, that side grew 80-fold. 1.1 million ended up joining on the southern. In total, you had 3 million soldiers enlist on both sides. And that's again, it comes down to the core of officers who's prepared to take recruits and organize them and then let them and tell them what to do. I mean, imagine being in that position. You have to know the drill, right? And so, just to run through this a little bit, at the risk of bringing you all into the rabbit hole with me, we will come out on the other end, and I think it will be helpful. But stay with me here. The smallest unit of the U.S. Army or the Marine Corps it's called a team or a fire team. There's 3 to 4 soldiers, and it's going to have a leader. Even at that small scale, think this is like the size of one of our smallest cells, right? At that small scale, the leader of a team will typically be a sergeant. In the Marine Corps, it'd be like a lance corporal. We're talking about someone with 2 to 4 years of experience. Oftentimes, in the last couple of years, we were forming a cell of 3 or 4 comrades, putting in charge of that somebody who was recruited 2 or 3 months ago. And, the military doesn't do that. we weren't sending them into combat. We were sending them into campuses and workplaces. But you put a few of these teams together, everything works in 3s or 4s. You take one unit, put them together, then you got the next unit. That's a squad. 8 to 12 people is a squad. That's going to have in its leadership a staff sergeant. So this is someone that's got like 6 years of experience. Think a large branch, 10 or 12 comrades. Do you have someone that joined in 2019 leading that? Probably not in most cases. Again, put a few squads together. Now you have a platoon, 30 to 50 people. This is going to have a commissioned officer who's been to some kind of a military academy at minimum, a lieutenant who's been to West Point or reserve officer training or some kind of thing like this, 4 to 6 years of education to lead that group. And that's like a district. That's our Brooklyn district. There's a certain level, and each of these units has one cadre in charge of overseeing the unit who's answering to someone above them and who has basically 3 or 4 people below them giving mentorship to, giving guidance to, but also giving orders. Now, obviously, there's a difference, comrades. I'm not saying we're not building a paramilitary organization. It's different. We're not building a chain of command either. It's seniority and years of service. It's not the same for political leadership, because we're not training a network to hand down orders and people to be obedient to that. But that's not the way it works. We're trying to build a network that hands down like political clarity and inspiration. And you are trying to build like mentor relationships of training cadres that can help someone understand Marxism better, build their confidence, their clarity, and their ability to explain these ideas to others. Because after all, we're not going, the combat that we're going into, the class war, a cadre of a class war, think about it. The military is sending people to spread destruction and misery and to spread artillery. We're trying to spread ideas and to spread the influence of a revolutionary program. And so for that, you need cadres every bit as much as a military does, but it's a different type of cadres and it's a different type of structure. So I thought many of these things were quite interesting. I mean, they want it to be a very rock solid structure. Sometimes it becomes not so solid, by the way. Sometimes the thread connecting soldiers to officers becomes quite tenuous, and we can talk about that. But you have a cadre density throughout the army. That's the thing that needs to be understood, is that 15 to 20% of the troops at a large scale are going to be officers or non-commissioned officers. If the RCA was a military unit, it would be a battalion, and it would probably have 150 to 200 officers and sergeants who have an average of like 6 years of experience, more at higher levels, less at lower levels. And so this is basically, if you look at the structure we're trying to build, something that's solid, something that holds together, but we're not just trying to sustain a group of 10,000. See, when we get to 10,000, that's not when we all give high fives and then our work is done. We're trying to build something that can, our work really will begin when we have these kinds of numbers. The session we just talked about is deploying cadres into high-stakes situations to be able to make decisions and to counter this vicious enemy that we've been talking about, the capitalist class, the most vicious that history has ever seen. And so we need serious leadership for that. I think it's also, there's a number of things. How much do I want to keep talking about the military before? Well, one other thing here is that I found this document. There's a lot of things on the internet, and one of them is Raising an Army, 10 rules. And it's not a joke. This guy is a mercenary private contractor who works like for the U.S. imperialists. When they go in and destroy a country, then you know that the imperialists have to rebuild an army. They often do a bad job of it. But this guy was critical of the Pentagon's system, and he's got 10 rules. He says the first one was to drop the Pentagon's train and equip mentality. Let me just read you this. Raising armies is more sophisticated than this. It involves growing leaders, building institutions, instilling professionalism. Training and equipping alone only gives you better dressed soldiers who can shoot straighter. It goes on. Number two is, secondly, you have to understand this is a deeply political activity. Technical approaches that ignore the politics will fail. Here's another. I'm not going to go all 10. But another one, you have to instill a professional military ethos. That's another way for saying you need political education. You need ideological training. Starting in basic training, imbue respect for the rule of law and allegiance to the Constitution. This was, again, someone who built an army in Liberia in 2014 or early 2000s. It says Liberian recruits spent as much time in the classroom as they did on the rifle range. So when you're building, he says, if you don't do this, you're going to have an army of privates. Basically soldiers with no experience and no qualifications to lead and to command and to hold things together. And of course, an army like that just falls apart. He said selecting for leadership is difficult. It takes 20 years to make a colonel in the U.S. Army. A colonel, I think, would oversee like a brigade of 5,000 or something like that. And yet the countries can't wait that long. They call this line of business, they don't just call it army building, they say security sector reform. And even that is a little strong, so they call it SSR. And so the last rule is, lastly, be humble. SSR is a marathon, not a sprint. Whether one is raising an army of 2,000 or 200,000, the methods are essentially the same, differing only in scale and scope. So I think we can take some of these methods, some of them don't really apply. The firefighters are also organized in a paramilitary organization. I thought this was interesting. I mean, there's patterns to this, right? Every New York City has 5 borough commands. Each has a borough commander. There's 9 divisions throughout. Each division has 4 to 7 battalions led by a battalion chief. Each battalion consists of 3 to 8 firehouses. That's around 200 firefighters. Each firehouse consists of 1 to 3 fire companies, each led by a captain who commands 3 lieutenants and 12 to 20 firefighters. In short, you can see when you need to mobilize large numbers of people to do something risky, it's good to think through the leadership structure. And this obviously applies not just to, think about what was achieved in 1917. I mean, this is basically, I think you can understand it better now after going through all this detail about the military thing. You had a general staff at the beginning of that revolution. In February 1917, you had 8,000 members of the Bolshevik Party. These were experienced people. These were people that had been through a lot. The Revolutionary Party had grown, had collapsed, had grown again in 1912, 1913. World War I starts, it collapses again. It's demoralizing. You need people, if you're going to be in it for the long haul and go through all of that, you need people who have a long view of history and understand what they're really doing at a deep level, and are not just going to be swayed by how things are going in the recent period. So that's the cadres. Over time, you forge something that is based on depth and clarity. Well, that's what you had essentially at the beginning of 1917. Now, they put forward an idea, right? The idea is, yes, you've overthrown the Tsar. The February Revolution overthrew the Tsar, but set up a capitalist government, a provisional government in its place. Lenin's message is, we're not going to be part of this government. It says it's a revolutionary government. It's not. It needs to be overthrown as well. We need to bring the working class to the realization that this is not their government, and that in order to achieve the basic material, the immediate urgent demands that the working class made this revolution for, like we need something to eat, we need to stop sending our youth to the front into a meat grinder. In order to achieve that, you have to overthrow the capitalists. This is the message. This is the program, right? All power to the Soviets. So this 8,000 is now the cadre there to transmit the message. Like the incident command begins, right? Now here's what we need to do. Go out and spread it. And you have agitators who know how to connect with the crowd. And you have people, correspondents, who know how to produce leaflets. And you've built up an apparatus of media that, as Lenin said, you need to build a machine and build it up to a degree of perfection that you can be able to inform the working class of Petrograd overnight. That's exactly what they built. And they informed the working class many steps of the way, night after night. Posters all over the streets of Petrograd. They were communicating. The whole thing is like you've built a massive apparatus capable of communicating on a massive scale, communicating to millions. Now, how do you build an army of communicators? Well, you have to have a lot of discussion and political clarity, and those people need to have depth. And being a good agitator means being rooted in a very thorough, very deep, very well-rounded understanding of the issues, so that you can say this is getting to the heart of it. You can cut through something, make it very simple. Plekhanov, one of the founders of Russian Marxism, explained the difference between propaganda and agitation. Propaganda is explaining many ideas to small numbers of people. We're talking what we're doing: books, theory, a view of history, right? A consistent ideology, a thorough philosophical foundation. That's propaganda. Agitation is few ideas to many people, but you can't just choose one or the other. There's a sequence to this. In order to create agitators who are effective, who are able to connect with the crowd, you have to train them in propaganda, very thorough training in Marxism. And at that level, then you have a Fiona Lully who can get on GB News and just send zingers and expose the hypocrisy of the ruling class.
We've seen from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That is an anti-Semitic chant calling for the eradication of Israel, the eradication of Israelis, and the eradication of Jewish people.
No, you're a liar. You're a liar.
And when a Tory politician says, aren't you going to defend Britain?
When threats are growing, it requires all of Britain to lean in, as we've done in the past, hesitantly though at first, to say we're going to stand up and we're going to be firm and we're going to defend Britain.
There is no all of Britain. There's you guys and there's everyone else, right? If Putin is a threat to the working class in Britain, I don't trust Keir Starmer, I don't trust David Lammy, I don't trust the defence companies, I don't trust the billionaires, I don't trust the establishment as people who are going to defend the working class in Britain.
A class perspective, very simple. Well, 9/10 of the revolution was winning over the working class to a revolutionary program. And what Lenin understood as early as, probably back in those Tsarist prison cells, is that you need to train cadres very thoroughly in Marxist theory and unwavering Marxist theory. It's like we have to fight eclecticism. We don't take a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Marx, Engels, Lenin, Trotsky, they were the ones who got to the root of it. And their view is consistent. When you read one, you're reading all four, and you realize that. And any real Marxist, when you realize it, and you can't unrealize it. There's one Marxism. There's not many Marxisms. And when you understand it, then you see its power. We're trying to build something around that realization, and that's what Lenin understood. That is the thing that you have to do. Very few people have understood it through history, but we are the thread of those who have understood it in this international. If you think about it, it's kind of like you have an uprising is also one of these emergencies that's going to have an incident command set up, and they're going to have a general staff to respond to it. And it's going to be a pretty serious thing. Now, it's going to be essentially cadre versus cadre, right? Like one structure of leadership and response versus another structure of leadership and response. And in a revolution, you have one of them win. One of them was more prepared than the other. And one of them was more ready to enlist support in terms of numbers than the other one was. And the one that thought it had solid command, see, the military structure is about command and control. That's openly what they say. We're not about command and control. We're about political clarity. We're about truth. I mean, dialectical materialism is the thing that's guiding us. And so which one is ultimately stronger? I mean, revolutions, once you have mobilized the working class, the other one can melt away very quickly. I say this because we have left down to us a pretty awesome remnant of history from 1917. Trotsky reproduced a dialogue that took place among Tsarist officers when the February Revolution had basically had won, but they're realizing in the Central Command that they're realizing this fact through this conversation. And here's two generals, General Ivanov and General Khabalov. Okay, let me just read through the thing. How many troops are in order and how many are misbehaving? Khabalov's reply: I have at my disposal in the Admiralty building 4 companies of the Guard, 5 squadrons of cavalry and Cossacks, and 2 batteries. The rest of the troops have gone over to the revolutionists, or, by agreement with them, are remaining neutral. Soldiers are wandering through the town singly or in bands, disarming officers. Which railroad stations are guarded? Response: all the stations are in the hands of the revolutionists and are strictly guarded by them. In what parts of the city is order preserved? Response: the whole city is in the hands of the revolutionists. Wait, hold it, there's more. The telephone is not working. There's no communication between different parts of the city. What authorities are governing the different parts of the city? Response: I cannot answer this question. Are all the ministers functioning properly? Sir, the ministers have all been arrested by the revolutionists. What police forces are at your disposal at the present moment? None whatever. What technical and supply institutions of the War Department are now in your control? I have none. What quantity of provisions is at your disposal? There are no provisions at my disposal. How many weapons, artillery, and military stores have fallen into the hands of the mutineers? All the artillery establishments are in the hands of the revolutionists. What military forces and staffs are in your control? The chief of staff of the district is in my personal control. With the other district administrations, I have no connections. So in the key moment, I mean, all of the command and control counts for nothing if the whole mechanism breaks down. And history has shown many times the kinds of conditions that lead it to break down. That is, comrades, if our cadre are powerful enough, if they're strong enough, if they're prepared enough. And that is the whole point of the grounding in theory. How do we know how far along we are in creating a revolutionary military academy, a red West Point, a revolutionary war college? Well, I think you have a good example that came out not long ago from Denmark. This was something that was circulated in RCI Bulletin 23. Now, we explained that the Danish section is doing quite well, right? It's a growing section, fast-growing section, very energetic in a small country. The working class of Denmark is just over 3 million people. which means that we have almost one comrade per 10,000 workers. And when they reach 1,000 comrades, there'll be one comrade per 3,000 workers. If what they had right now was like the U.S. population in terms of the working class, it would be like having 13,000 comrades right now in Denmark. So they're not doing bad, but that's why they're getting on the radar of the ruling class and their establishment media. And the largest paper in Denmark, the largest liberal paper, had this expose of journalists that went undercover. Well, he says I infiltrated. He says by infiltrating, I talked to a very eloquent, open-minded, friendly young communist. I expressed interest in Marxism and immediately got invited to a branch meeting. And he said, I didn't know what to expect. I thought it was going to be something absurd, probably, like people dressed up like Soviets or old-time nostalgics about the Soviet Union, or maybe hippies. I didn't know. Well, the title, I think the title of the article is something like, I infiltrated a communist meeting. I expected something absurd. What I found was the key to victory. Allow me to read to you extensively from this article. Because the way he says it, the way one of our class enemies says it, is almost better than any comrade could have. The presentation, he's describing the meeting, right? There's a young comrade gives a lead off. The presentation, which was well prepared and well formulated, the level of depth of the discussion would take most people's breath away. Even relatively inexperienced attendees were able to recite and understand Marxist works and argue articulately from them. All of them had a broad knowledge of everything from socioeconomic conditions and economic history to war history and philosophy. The Revolutionary Communist Party must be said to be able to educate and train its members to a degree that enables them to clearly and convincingly present the Marxist message. Literally, even the newest members, the lowest common denominator, were at a higher level than the average Dane and the average liberal. Despite great diversity of age groups and educational backgrounds, all members, new and old, are apparently encouraged to immerse themselves intellectually and study Marxist theory thoroughly. In addition, they learn to formulate their knowledge as arguments, to write speeches, to debate, and so on, with the result that even a relatively new and young member of the party can be considered a top-tuned, well-oiled machine when it comes to defending the Marxist-Leninist vision. Another observation: although the 2-hour-long debate covered a wide range, all topics and questions were considered from a Marxist perspective. In formulating their arguments, the party's members took an uncompromising point of departure from the theory behind the party's ideology. He's like, wow, they're consistent. They all have the same view. And this is the conclusion. However much we may disagree with the Marxist worldview, we must recognize that part of Marxism's gains can be attributed to the fact that without apologizing for itself, it actually tries to deliver clear and unequivocal answers to humanity's problems, big and small. We must realize, here's the end, we must realize that the ideological battle is still raging, and that in order to win this battle, we cannot deny the need for a serious weapons upgrade. If you are in doubt about how to do it, I can recommend a visit to the Revolutionary Communist Party. Every cell secretary, every comrade who's leading a cell or any other unit of the party, write this down: RCI Bulletin 23. You can print this out, study it, mark it up, and ask yourself, is my cell at this level? Are we producing this kind of atmosphere? Is this our environment? Is this where our training grounds is at? And if not, what's our plan? How are we going to get to this point where we're producing this? And it wasn't just accidental. It's not like the Danish comrades they swim in Bolshevism and then they're just ready to. Hard work produces this result. This means that everyone, and it says it in the bulletin, they expected, look, we're going to have a contact is going to be there. All right, everyone studies and prepares and does the reading and comes with something thoughtful to deliver. And the result is, you ever have one of these cell meetings that's just electric and it just leaves you feeling with energy? And then you can go and build and you can get through another week and you can keep, that's the thing that we're trying to conjure, a factory of that. That doesn't happen automatically, and it happens only when the comrades go into it saying, that's what I want to do. I want to strengthen my cell. I'm ready to bring something. Let's bring some fire this week to the cell meeting and do it each time. The results are going to be an atmosphere that produces cadres. Now, this was the way the Russian revolutionaries did it. It's not like, it was hard and it was boring. and it took years, and it was not glorious. And that was part of it. And a lot of people went through the ranks and, burnt out or disappeared or got active for a little while. I mean, the things that we're up against, we're not up against a czarist officialdom that's raiding our offices and, rounding up our comrades and sending us to prison. We don't have to worry about those things. But we're up against the pressures of life, like life under capitalism. And that means too many people, they come into the ranks, this is cool, I like this. They don't really get it, what we're doing. And eventually the pressures of life are like, okay, I'm gonna go do this. And I got other priorities in my life, maybe I'll come back. And a lot of them are coming back and it's going well. But basically, what does that mean? It means that the general staff isn't quite at the level that it needs to be in order to impart the clarity to those ranks that are coming in about what we're doing. That's why we wrote this organizational resolution, to try and help with that. Basically, it's like, if you understand Bolshevism, if you can impart to people who are new, welcome in, this is your party. But you're not just here because you're a communist and we're a communist and we're all going to talk about communism. And you're not just here because you agree with our views and you want it to be with a group of like-minded people. What you're joining is a training grounds. That's the thing. We need to find the way to explain to contacts and new comrades, like, you are joining an ideological training grounds that will make a revolutionary out of you. And it's going to be hard and it requires your commitment, but there's a massive reward. Just get a taste of this Marxism. Once you see this clarity, I mean, that's the thing that can drive us, but you need to have that kind of environment that produces that result. How did it start in the early days? Plekhanov was the founder of Russian Marxism. Throughout the history of Bolshevism, Lenin and Trotsky were always even though he became a Menshevik and he lost his bearings, but he played a role in starting this thing out in the 1880s when there was no Marxist in Russia. And he laid the seeds, and it was patient, very thorough philosophical work. They said, Lenin and Trotsky recognized that Plekhanov educated an entire generation of revolutionaries. But in these early days, what were these discussion groups like? Well, I have here a passage from a memoir of an industrial worker who participated in one of these propaganda circles in the 1880s. This is how they described it. The propagandist acquainted us with the struggle for a better future. He pointed out the path of our movement, the broad outlines of socialism, and told us we will attain this future only by the efforts of the working class as a whole. But to be an organizer of the working class, it is necessary to be a cultivated person, to whom others could turn with their questions, and from whom they could receive definitive answers. Therefore, it is necessary to discipline and cultivate oneself. It is necessary to learn by a definite program. A good propagandist must be able to answer such questions as why there is day and night, seasons of the year, and eclipses of the sun. He must be able to explain the origin of the universe and the origin of species. In the program must be included history, the history of culture, political economy, the history of the working class. This is depth. This is the way you train a foundation that can sustain a revolutionary movement. And you cannot skip this step. We have comrades that are doing this kind of thing. We're reading Reason and Revolt and learning about materialism. I've visited comrades and I've seen, wow, our ranks are buzzing with enthusiasm for materialism and dialectics, and this is an awesome thing. This is where it begins. There's a sequence to these things. And you can't go straight to the exciting, now we're going to do the labor movement. We're going to take things by storm and we're going to march in. The whole what is to be done was an argument against people that just wanted to jump to the fun part. Let's storm the fortress of the Tsars. And Lenin's like, okay, yeah, you and what army? The whole thing is, how are you going to build this thing? Lenin understood you need the depth first. The rest will come from that. You need the clarity of Marxism, and you need a very thorough training in this. And that takes time, and it's not fun. It's not fun to be told, this is a patient task. It's going to take years. That's what we're telling people. That's the bitter pill. But I think we're doing a pretty good job so far of convincing plenty of people that it is worth it and that it's a rewarding process to engage in. Lenin argued that the press was central to this. Now, this is another thing that people didn't understand back then. They don't understand it now. But I think there's basically an argument here in what is to be done and in where to begin that has been overlooked by the vast majority of people that read this stuff. The press, Lenin was arguing, it's not just that Lenin loved newspapers. Like, yeah, this is cool. You got to be able to, sell these things. And that's not what he was getting at. He was saying that the press is a benchmark for something else. It's a proxy. It's a stand-in. See, if you can do this thing, then you can do this other thing. And it's a practical metric for your political strength in general to be able to produce media, to produce a press regularly, a podcast, to be able to produce a flow of information that analyzes what's happening. Now, if this flow of information is crisp and clear and precise, if it's effective, it'll spread. If it's blurry in general and vague, it'll spread. It won't spread as well, you know? The whole thing, the question of influence, again, we want to jump to the exciting part. We want influence. We want 10,000 people. Well, if you just enlist 10,000 people, but you don't have anything to say to those people, like they're going to look for, okay, what's our marching orders? 10,000. We're here to sign up for the Bolshevism. What do we do? You need a general staff ready to say, okay, well, you unit, come with me. Here's what we're going to do. Boom. And train them and start explaining things. And you need to be able to understand events thoroughly. It begins with understanding. See, the training we're trying to imbue comrades with isn't just training like our heads are in the clouds and now we're the intelligentsia and we're studying French philosophy and now we know this thing that the rest of the working class doesn't know and we're Marxists. That's not the point, comrades. You're trying to arrive at a level of clarity that is an instrument that can allow you to get back to the concrete at a higher level, to say the thing in the way that it needs to be said, that it lands, to be able to deliver clarity in a way that no other force in the political landscape is delivering. When we can do that, then we're ready for influence. And the press, the media, and I mean that broadly, the booklets we produce, the books, the things that we're producing, and Against the Stream and the Communists of America, everything we're using in order to try and get our ideas out there is kind of a benchmark for our political strength and our ability to enlist support and to get influence. And that strength manifests by you all consuming the media and spreading it. If it's effective, if it's helpful, you get an idea that's like, okay, this explained it so well. Now I understand. And I've had that moment many times, like the article, and there's an article in here. Wow, now I get de-dollarization in the bond market. That was like, whew, that one went over my head. And this article explained it. And then, comrades, remember, I went into the office and I couldn't stop talking to everyone about, you got to read this article. You got to read this article. Media department will circle up. We're going to read this article together. Can the EC have a discussion about this article? This is the way the media is supposed to work. It's like, it's not just written to entertain. It's not just written to inform. It's meant to be the ammunition, that you pick up and then you use. And so if you have a strong media department, if you have a strong apparatus for producing this, then you're, here's the other thing. Here's the other media department that we're up against is Steve Bannon's. I've had this on my mind. And comrades know this is another sort of pet topic of mine. He's a vile reactionary. This is one of our enemies, one of our most determined enemies. But something about it, I find it effective, and when your enemy is effective, you need to pay attention to what's going on there. And what Steve Bannon is doing is, his view, he's a fundamentalist Catholic, and he's a vile xenophobe. Everything comes down to the immigrants, right? All the problems, everything he says is like, this is what the immigrants are doing, and he wants to give Trump a backbone to fight back, to railroad the courts. Like, that's his program. But what is he doing? He's taking in the news and he's churning out propaganda in a prolific way. Like the podcast of Steve Bannon is called War Room, and they produce like 4 to 6 hours of podcast streaming content every single day, 6 days a week. And it's taking the headlines of the news, the headlines of everything that's happening. And Steve Bannon has shared, like, this is my media routine. I read the Financial Times every day, and I read the Guardian, the BBC. Steve Bannon is consuming this, and he has a team of like 15 people working on his podcast, and they're all consuming the news, and they're reading it. And in his War Room, there's a fireplace, and above the fireplace, they have MSNBC. It's like, we have to listen to the enemy and what they're saying. And they have the producers are like taking clips. And the beginning of his episode, if you watch any of this stuff, the beginning is like just a video montage of clips. This is what the mainstream media is saying. Just a couple seconds of this and a couple seconds of that. And he gives you a feel like this is the message out there. And then he comments on it. And it's the volume of what they're able to pump out. That's what allows him to be directing a current of public opinion. People can follow that. And then you guess what? There's people that will, maybe they're workers. Maybe some of them are like on the shift listening. And while they're on their shift, they're like, this stuff is going into their head. We need to make the revolutionary communist version of this. We need to counter this and we need to outdo them. We need to out-organize them. We need to out-train them and out-discipline them and out-study them and out-cadre them. That is the force that we're up against. And I think if you see how they're doing it and how effective it is, then you understand this is why we're saying the paper is important. And then what's this joker, the liberal Hassan? Is that the... And he's like...
Of course a trot is selling a newspaper. Pamphlets and newspapers. Virtually everything that you search online that is a Marxist webpage with things written on it will almost always be operated by a trot. These are, in the socialist movement, these guys are like the archivists, okay?
Okay, yeah, they don't get it. They don't see why we're doing it. We understand why we're doing it. And we need to use this to train up our cadres, and really we don't have a second to spare. That was the point on the media. Just to bring this all home, comrades, I think it's important that, you know, we wrote this as an instrument to put into your hands to help recruit. If you understand what the party's strategy is better, then you can get people on board more easily. And you can also help comrades who are new, who are building up a commitment and saying, okay, I'm trying to understand what this is. See, when I joined, it took a while. There's an interval involved. Like, you don't just join and then, boom, I'm ready to be a Bolshevik, like a lifelong committed soldier. It takes time before it took me a couple of years. Like, I joined and my commitment was like, I'm very interested. I was very enthusiastic, but I was like, yeah, communists. I'm surrounded by communists. I'm a communist. Yay. But it took me a while to realize what this party is going to do and what role we're going to play in history. And when I did, then everything changed. And you can't just artificially give that in a package to people. It takes time for that to sink in. Like, we are going to overthrow capitalism. We are not just saying these things. We are going to do it, comrades. We've had a good start. I think that this party has become a factory of cadres like we've never seen before. And I see it every time I visit an area, every time I interact with comrades that I haven't seen for a while. Like, the development is happening at a pace that I have never seen before. And I think that's awesome. And really, that is the only metric of our success. That's really the thing we're trying to do here. There is a surface appearance, and then there's the reality that's happening beneath the surface. And the reality is, we are a cadre organization, and we're developing cadres, and that's the only metric that matters. What matters is not the surface number. What matters is the core of cadres, the general staff that are coming out of this military revolutionary academy, who know what they're doing in life and who know what their role in history is, and who are able to impart that to others. That is the real metric of our success. Now, there's a lot of practical things that could be said. It's always important to bring this home, and I think Trotsky had the ability to go into the theory realm and then to come back down and to bring it home. And we had a quote at the end of this resolution when the first time he was addressing Americans as comrades in the left opposition. In this letter, I think it was from 1927. And I think it's kind of a cool moment when he's like first corresponding with the American comrades. Well, listen to what he says. We must not for a minute lose sight of the fact that the might of American capitalism rests more and more upon a foundation of the world economy with its contradictions and crises, military and revolutionary. This means that a social crisis in the United States may arrive a good deal sooner than many think, and have a feverish development from the beginning. Hence the conclusion, it is necessary to prepare. And he says, for the majority of the socialists, he's talking about those people that are just kind of like socialists on the side. Like, yeah, I'll overthrow capitalism with you on the weekend. But they're not really like, he's understanding, if you want to build something, you can't do it in that way. You can't like half it. You can't just like phone it in. For the majority of the socialists, and I have in view the governing strata, their socialism is a side issue, a second-class occupation accommodated to their leisure hours. He goes on to say, these gentlemen consecrate 6 days of the week to their liberal or commercial professions. On the seventh day, they consent to occupy themselves with the saving of their souls. These are not intellectual opponents, but class enemies. He's talking about the Second International in reality. But then he brings it home. Here's what you do. Bringing it home means, say, here's what you do. Like, what is the takeaway from this? Don't just leave it in the abstract. He calls on them to find the road to the youth, to dedicate their time to training up the cadres. He says, find a few contacts, young workers, like they could be teenagers. Get in touch with them and develop them into cadres. He says, remain in contact, continual contact with them. Help them in their self-education. Train them in the questions of scientific socialism and systematically introduce them to the revolutionary politics of the proletarian vanguard. What it means to be a cadre is not like you learn so much and you get so smart and then now you got it and you're a cadre. You don't get a rank, you don't get a badge, you don't get said that now you're a cadre. Yay, that's not the point. That's not the point. What your measure, being a cadre means you have something to offer to other comrades and you can lift them up. Your ability to build other cadres is the thing that matters. Your ability to inspire, not to impress. Your ability to educate and to bring things out in other comrades and to build their confidence in the ideas of Marxism, in the revolutionary program. It's a thing that you can, it's not about, you don't speak in order to shine and show the comrades. You speak in order to help deliver clarity. That is the thing that a cadre is able to do. So I think, comrades, if we use these methods, and I think we know what we need to do. I mean, I've seen it. It's popping through the discussions all weekend. It's quite clear what we need to do, and I think we're about to do it on a scale that we've never seen before. I mean, the recruitment and the education of revolutionary cadres, if we use these methods, the methods that they've seen in Denmark, we are going to become a force like we haven't seen before. We will become a household name. It'll be a matter of time before the RCA starts sweeping aside any other left group. There's no competition out there. We're living in a theoretical desert. There's no Marxists out there. There's nobody talking about the things that we're talking about. There's nobody training cadres the way we're training. We have no competition. We have a wide open field. We need to get to work. That's the thing that we need to do. And if we do this, comrades, we will become a household name. We'll become the worst nightmare of the ruling class. And we will become the only hope for the working class.
For the most part, the majority of people can be reached because these issues impact more and more layers of the working class every day. So it's been really encouraging to get these reactions. When I started, I thought that there would be way more negative interactions than positive, but that's been completely the opposite in my experience.
This is the only party that is actively seeking to overthrow capitalism, not in another life, but in our lifetime.
We understand that the working class needs more than just the objective failure of capitalism to actually overthrow it. It's going to take the subjective factor, the Revolutionary Party. We have to actually be the collective long-term memory of the lessons of the working class, the lessons of past revolutions. We have to link up the causes of the international working class to the struggles that we have around us. We have to point the way towards revolution, and that cannot be accomplished on our own. It has to be collectively, but not just in a collection of atomized individuals across the country. We have to organize with the communists directly around us, and that is through the cell. But how do we actually recruit them? How do we build the cell? How do we put it together? Well, the first thing that you have to remember is that the objective condition of the decline of capitalism is creating a mood in society that is becoming revolutionary. This is the molecular process of revolution that Trotsky talked about. Polling showed that 20% of young people saw communism as their ideal economic system. You may have heard us say that before, but it is pretty remarkable that if we extrapolate that statistic, there's potentially tens of millions of people in America that have a favorable view of communism. To add to that with a more recent statistic, 70% of people that were polled said that the U.S. economic and political system needed major changes or needed to be completely torn down. Again, I'll repeat that. 70% of people are coming to the conclusion that the system in America does not work and it needs to be majorly changed or torn down. So what will happen to these people when the system refuses to change? And we know it will refuse to change. We can see that in the example of U.S. imperialism in Palestine, seeing the genocide taking place and refusing to change their position on it in any meaningful way.
If the United States stands with Israel, we will not ever fail to have their back.
So what will happen to that 70% of people that say that the system needs major changes when they come to the conclusion that changes are no longer possible? Well, the feeling that it needs to be completely torn down will become the dominant feeling in society. But there's already people that are communists that are around us. So we can find these people. Those people are our friends, they're our family, they are our coworkers, acquaintances, classmates. You're going to actually hear in this episode from some of the recent recruits to our party. And the first person you're going to hear from is Kurt from New Jersey. And you've actually heard from Kurt before if you listen to this podcast because of his joint submission that he sent in.
I believe the only path forward for humanity is a proletarian revolution. Capitalism is actively and indiscriminately destroying the planet. I have 2 small children, and thinking about the world that they will inherit makes me weep. I want to be part of the solution to the sickness that grips the world, as I recognize no one can save us except for ourselves.
Growing up in a working family, Kurt had seen his fair share of economic hardships, but also began to see a general problem with the system that we live in.
I've seen how both sides live, and it's always bothered me that, like, I can see people that are clearly working very hard and still have to live in absolute squalor. And there's really nothing that they can do about it either, because they're constantly playing catch up, right? They're either in debt or, as soon as they get ahead, something comes up and now they have an expense, like they have to repair their car or, someone has to go to the doctor. Any little thing that is not, part of your daily bread, basically, anything extra after that seems to just completely knock people down.
Kurt, like a lot of people, went searching for an organization that actually had the same conclusions that he did, that this system was fundamentally broken, but had a very hard time finding an organization that was seriously trying to organize against capitalism.
Tried joining the CPUSA, found out that they were absolutely fucking useless. They also took over a month to email me just to get back on my request for membership. I looked into, like, the PSL. Didn't seem like much was going on there. There was another group that I was with, the PLP, that I met at a March 2nd protest in Washington Square Park for Palestine. And I've been doing study groups with them, but that's all they really do is, we do Zoom study groups twice a month, and that's about it. I've been to 2 of them. That's it. There's not really a lot else going on with it.
We meet people like Kurt all the time in our recruitment efforts. This just goes to show that it's not a lack of communists that is the problem. It's actually a vacuum for a party that can actually absorb all of the communist elements. Not just any party, but a serious professional party that is taking the task of overthrowing capitalism as serious as it needs to be taken. We can't take a frivolous attitude and let these communists slip through our fingers. We have to actually create a professional apparatus that can capture and merge with these communists that already exist.
I've learned enough. I've seen enough. It's time to do something, and that was the motivating factor for me. And the experience was good. The first phone call I got from a comrade, John, it was a very good conversation. He asked some questions, and he also answered my questions with ease, which made me that much more motivated to be involved. It definitely told me that the organization was serious, and this was exactly where I needed to be.
That's coming from a comrade in Washington, D.C. named Juan. We haven't really had anything in Washington, D.C., but we do now because of efforts of people like Juan for, number one, reaching out. It's also because of the efforts of another comrade that's from Philadelphia named Nico, who on a spring break holiday actually took it upon himself to, instead of just taking a vacation, actually going out to Washington, D.C. and help build the cell.
Yeah, so I used my spring break, my week off work, to head down to Washington, D.C. and to Baltimore to build a cell of the Revolutionary Communists of America. I brought with me 25 copies of our paper, 5 copies of our IDOM theoretical magazine, a couple hundred leaflets and stickers, and over the course of a week, went to a large protest, went to 3 college campuses talking to students and workers there, and a couple neighborhoods around DC. Over that time, we made 5 new recruits, 5 new dues-paying party-building members. And yeah, handed out hundreds of leaflets, sold almost all of the papers and magazines. And yeah, really started building in a city that we never had before.
Throughout this campaign that we've been on of just asking people, are you a communist? Is that some people are not ready to label themselves as a communist for one reason or another, but we still end up recruiting them because they can be convinced that the thoughts that they had, the beliefs that they do have, do align with what a communist thinks should happen in the world, the changes that they want to see, and the method by which that they think that that change will come about. They come to realize, well, it turns out I am a communist, or I actually agree with what the communists are saying, so I must be one. We've had plenty of examples of that.
About 10 months ago, I was first introduced to the party by stickers that were posted around my college campus. They said, "Are you a communist?" on them. And honestly, at first I thought it was a joke. We're taught that there's nothing else that will work but the capitalist system, and that other systems such as socialism and communism are bad. However, at this point, like many others, I was sick and tired of this so-called best system and was willing to hear just about anyone else out. So when I saw the communists in person in front of me, I approached them with an open mind. I liked what they said, and it only took a couple of weeks after that for me to get involved. Now I've been home for the break between semesters, and my main focus has been on building the party in other areas of Texas. I've been primarily targeting my workplace and have been trying to raise the political level of consciousness within my coworkers. I've recently had some good conversations with people about the upcoming election, state of the country, and what our perspectives and solutions are on how to approach everything.
And you may be listening to this and think, well, this is great, that there are all these communists around me that I may be able to find, but I don't feel ready. I don't think that I can explain the ideas enough or to the degree of which I think it's necessary to start. And we just want to say that you don't have to wait until you're, quote unquote, ready. What would that even mean to be ready? Our comrade from Washington, D.C. actually had something really great to say about this.
You've already done the hard part. You've already reached certain conclusions. We can get you the theory, but you already understand, at least from a big picture perspective, that capitalism is the problem.
We have plenty of resources for people to start today. One of those resources is the paper There's a reason why we print the paper. It's not because we're trying to become newspaper salesmen. It's because a physical paper is, like Lenin said, not just a collective propagandist, a propaganda tool, but also a collective organizer. When people see the paper, they understand it took a professional organization to produce this. The paper can be used to show we really are serious about what we're doing. And here it is, right here. This is our work for the last month or in the month before us. Again, what is to be done? Probably the most well-known but also most misunderstood document from Lenin. It explains all of this, the need for not just a very strong centralized organization, but also a central organ for that organization.
I'm Ben. I'm a member of the Revolutionary Communists of America, and I work at Keynes.
Hello, my name is Anthony. I'm a communist organizer at the RCA, and I also work at Raising Cane's.
Tell the audience what is special about you two.
What is it, that we're twins?
No, we're building a cell.
Oh.
You idiot. The start of building this cell, it really started in the like tail end of winter, tail end of December, where I like almost jokingly asked one of my coworkers, like, "Hey, are you a communist?" Because at that point I was like semi-new, like 3 months in, a new recruit in my perspective, and they actually answered yes. They answered proudly yes. In fact, they screamed in the kitchen, like, "Hell yeah, I'm a communist! Like, I'm a red-blooded commie." And I was like, "All right, I can definitely work with this." And luckily, we were both like pushed out the door to go like run trash to the dumpster outside of the restaurant. And I just started explaining like what our party is, like what cell meetings look like how like we develop our theoretical level, like what's necessary for a revolution, all like the I guess like basic principles of what you want someone to understand about the party. And they were actually brought on board. And I had 2 papers in my backpack, two of the socialist revolution issues, and they bought both that day. And I was like, all right, like this is the person I can consistently talk to, and they're still in our periphery now. So a few months down the line, me and my brother are consistently selling papers at this workplace, and like the middle of spring, we realized like, hey, like these like 5 people all have the same issue of the communists. Why don't we just make a reading group? And so one of my shifts, I just started asking around where most of those people worked the same day. I was like, hey, like, do you want to read about this? Like, do you guys want to talk about this? And I initially asked for just like confirmation. And then me and my brother went around the store a second time asking for like a day and a time that would work. And eventually that was a Sunday. And that meeting, that was like a week after, it was very phenomenal. Like I myself am surprised like how well it went. We sort of like popcorn read the second issue. We just discussed it article by article. And I think the most remarkable one was an article written by one of our Denton comrades, how a coworker was worked to death. And it was weird because it was the Walmart that's like not even a mile away from our restaurant. And so it like everyone realized like how close the class struggle was. And I think that is the point of the paper. Like that is the point of why we have these articles. That's why we have these reports. It's to show people like this is nothing alien to us. This is like what we're fighting for all the time. This is what we interact with all the time. The meeting was phenomenal, and I think it only went well because of the content of the paper.
I just wanted to add like sort of like an elaboration on like how it actually happened, like when it shifted basically. Prior to that, it wasn't just randomly that a bunch of people had the paper. It was like because every single day we were bringing the paper into the workplace, setting it out, and it would get moved and we have to set it out again. But it sort of inflated to a point when like not a day went by for a while there that like a paper wasn't sold. Like it was like daily paper sales for a while. And that evolved into this where we had maybe 5 or 6 people all with the same issue, all with the same availability, and they all wanted to meet and discuss it. The cell as it stands now, it's
it's a pretty casual thing. Like there isn't like a mandatory attendance or anything like that. And if people want to show up that aren't already in the reading group, it's sort of just open invitation to all of our coworkers. Like we've had random people just drop in. But going forward, I mean, it's just consistently reading the new issues and putting in like various other articles. Like because we've already gone over the second issue and not everyone has the third issue, we're just supplementing that with the pamphlet over the history of the Black struggle and the socialist revolution. And everyone's really excited for that.
The most recent paper has our program and our manifesto in it. That is an extremely valuable tool to strike up a conversation with somebody. The program and the manifesto give you a good general outlook for a range of issues that you can actually speak to. Whatever subject or problem somebody has, you can speak on that. What is our analysis of that? Why does this thing happen? And what should be done about it? And how will a communist party actually achieve that? So the program and the manifesto are extremely valuable resources for this. And we just actually published a convenient booklet with all of these things in it, including the manifesto for the Revolutionary Communist International. Marxist theory is the foundation of our organization. It's what makes up our program and our perspectives. And that takes the form of physical material like the paper, but not just the paper, but our booklets and our books. Examples of these materials being used to recruit are embodied in two stories from one comrade in Chicago named Helena.
I picked up, I think it was the Identity Politics pamphlet first, and I can't remember what I read after that. It was just like the intro packet, basically. I started reading it. I met up with some comrades in the branch. I attended a branch, and then I bought The History of Philosophy, which is really what sold me on the IMT as it formerly was. And I was like, wow, I have never encountered a group with this perspective before. People who are actually mobilizing and organizing on a level that could have like a material change. So I was really encouraged by that, and that's how I decided to join. And ever since then, the growth in Chicago has been, nothing short of remarkable. When I first joined, I think it was like maybe 9 or 10 people, just as one branch. And now we're about to divide into 7 branches. We have about 40 members in Chicago now, and I only see that number going up. We still have like tons of contacts coming in. So it's been a crazy year and a half, but I have learned more and become more optimistic. I cannot tell you what this has done for my mental health. Just having something worthwhile to put energy into, with an outcome that I can see happening on a scientific basis.
The other story from Helena can actually be found in a previous episode of ours. Helena is the comrade that actually was reading In Defense of Lenin on the train and engaged in a conversation with somebody who was interested in the book just based off of the cover. And Helena was able to talk to this person about the ideas of Lenin and talk about the organization. These moments don't happen with Helena or the person on the train unless you have the physical media of the paper, the booklets, and the book.
The Lie that Capitalism tells you about alienation and the way that people are unapproachable. And it's like, people are not unapproachable. You don't have to be scared of other people. Other people are living, if they're on the train, more likely than not, they are having some element of the same experience that you are. And if that connecting point is the train is late again, that's crazy. Got to get to work on time, or whatever it is. There's a way to connect to people. And so, yeah, I think over time I'm becoming more emboldened to be more frontward facing with the communism, shall we say, because everyone has been so supportive. Obviously, you might have an interaction with someone who's, the more backwards in their ideology. But I will say, for the most part, the majority of people can be reached. Because these issues impact more and more layers of the working class every day. So yeah, it's been really encouraging to like get these reactions. When I started, I thought that there would be way more negative interactions than positive, but that's been completely the opposite in my experience.
We have to be bold in order to find other communists. It won't simply come down to wearing the hammer and sickle or talking about communism without saying the word communism. It's going to come down to having the material out and open, and a willingness and an ability to talk about those ideas. Without that experience and without being prepared, we're not going to be able to recruit the best elements that exist out there in an atomized way as individuals. The only way to prepare yourself and equip yourself with experience and ability is by joining a party, becoming collectively educated through the cell, and then going out into the world as an organized communist. There are certain people that would have never joined had we not made a lot of preparations in the past to become firm in Marxist theory and have a boldness in presenting our ideas. When somebody comes to us and says, I think that I'm interested to join, one person that comes to mind is somebody that's in my area, DFW. His name is Ian.
Both my generation and my mom's generation, millennials, have lived through constant crisis. Capitalism continuing to implode on itself, then be bailed out by the government, then implode on itself, and then that cycle continuing. I think a really big radicalization point and a real reflection point for me was 2020, along with a lot of people. The fact that we had a complete buckling of the supply chains that were so overly complicated to cut down on the cost of production just blew my mind how this country lacked the ability to address a crisis that could have easily been avoided or at least minimized drastically. We had over 1 million people die in this country due to capitalism failing. And again, who were the people to bail out these corporations? The government. Why is that? Because the government doesn't represent the people. A majority of us in this country are living paycheck to paycheck. A majority of us in this country are just a couple paychecks away from being homeless on the streets.
For a while before actually joining the RCA, I understood the importance of getting organized in some way. I kind of got to the point of the world, I felt the world was completely collapsing around me, and all I did was complain about it. It got to the point where I needed to either find an organization or start getting organized, and starting off, the only thing that I was able to find was the DSA. The problem with the DSA is there are a lot of differing opinions and different sets of ideals that are so broad that basically nothing gets done. I was in the DSA close to a year, and every time that we would have meetings, it kind of just dissolved into a back and forth with no implementation.
And that's why I left the Freedom Road Socialist Organization and joined the Revolutionary Communists of America, because they're the most professional, serious organization that is not a terrorist organization, that is a totally legal above ground. So normally I read for 30 minutes and meditate for 30 minutes, but I gotta go to bed soon because I work nights. But I'm gonna read from the back page of the Revolutionary Communists of America newspaper. We have the Revolutionary Communist of America program for revolution. This is basically our manifesto. The Revolutionary Communists of America is a party of class fighters committed to the complete overthrow of capitalism. We fight to build a revolutionary leadership and to establish a workers' government that can mobilize the working class to tackle the capitalist roots of war, inequality, oppression, and climate catastrophe. We are proud members of the Revolutionary Communist International, which is active in dozens of countries worldwide. Point 1, rebuild the labor movement through class struggle. Only class struggle unionism, which starts at the premise that our interests and the bosses are diametrically opposed, can reverse decades of decline and put labor back on the offensive. The best way to prepare for an all-out general strike is to successfully organize millions of workers in a wave of industrial strikes, demonstrating the colossal power of the working class in action. However, trade union organization and struggle are not enough. Workers need a class-independent political expression to coordinate their common struggle against the capitalist class as a whole. Point 2. Down with the capitalist politicians. Build a communist party. Communists stand for uncompromising class independence and reject liberalism and Trumpism as two sides of the same capitalist coin. To combat the distorted polarization of the culture war, we stand for class polarization and the class war. The only way out of the impasse is a workers' government and a democratically planned economy that will usher in a system of workers' democracy based on the direct participation of the masses in government and the economy. To achieve this, the working class needs a revolutionary party armed with Marxist theory to fight the capitalists in every workplace and campus, on the streets, and at the ballot box. Point 3. Quality jobs, housing, healthcare, and education for all. Socialism is not only a good idea, it is objectively possible now, not in the distant future. Yet millions suffer from hunger, homelessness, unemployment, and disease. The socialist revolution will resolve this contradiction through social ownership, production, and distribution of society's collective wealth. For the first time in history, all humans will enjoy true equality of life, not mere formal equality before the law. Subpoint 1. Nationalize the major banks and monopolies. To break with the irrational chaos of the capitalist free market, a workers' government would expropriate the essential levers of the economy to be run under democratic workers' control and management, and integrated into a socialist plan of production to meet society's needs. Subpoint 2. We fight for a full-time job or a place in education for all. A workers' government would launch an extensive program of useful public works to create millions of quality jobs and upgrade public infrastructure, transportation, and housing, with accommodation for those with disabilities. A 20-hour work week and a national minimum wage of $5,000 per month would allow everyone to work while allowing plenty of time for leisure. And that money's available if we take it back from the bosses that steal the profits that we generate as workers. Subpoint 3. Housing. Evictions would be a thing of the past. A workers' government would establish a socialized plan for safe, quality housing for all, with fixed rent at no more than 10% of wages. Healthcare. Capitalist healthcare is a nightmare. This is subpoint 4. Millions have no access, and those who do must pay extortionate amounts for subpar care. We fight for a socialized healthcare system free at the point of service. Subpoint 5. Education. Under capitalism, most children receive only the minimum education to turn them into productive workers. Communists fight for the best possible education for all. Tuition and fees would be abolished. Student debt would be written off. And after-school programs and community centers would be robustly funded to engage the youth and enhance their development beyond the classroom. Point 4. An injury to one is an injury to all. The working class makes up the overwhelming majority of society. The only way they can keep us from turning against them is by turning us against each other. 4.1. Fight division with class struggle and unity. Racism, sexism, transphobia, and xenophobia are poison in the workers' movement and must be driven out. A workers' government would end mass incarceration and release all political prisoners. Border walls, deportation centers, and surveillance would be relics of the capitalist past. 4.2. Fight women's oppression. We stand unconditionally for full reproductive rights up to and including abortion. Parenthood would be radically transformed with generous parental leave and accessible full-time child care facilities. Domestic work would be socialized through an extensive public network of quality, affordable restaurants, laundry, and other socialized services. 4.3. Defend our rights. Bourgeois democracy is in crisis, and our civil rights and liberties are under constant attack. We defend basic freedoms, such as assembly and expression, not as ends in themselves, but as means for broadening the class struggle and preparing for power. 5. Combat the climate crisis with a socialist planned economy. A workers' government would immediately begin the transition to clean energy by retooling the international economy. Displaced workers would receive paid retraining and guarantee employment with no reduction in wages or benefits. Billions would be invested to develop mitigation strategies and new production techniques. On this basis, a massive expansion of the world economy could be realized in complete harmony with the environment. 6. Workers of the world unite. We oppose imperialist intervention anywhere. No war but the class war. A workers' government would abolish all capitalist trade and bankers' agreements and write off the debts imposed by imperialism. It would slash the military budget and invest in social needs. In unity with our class sisters and brothers worldwide, our historic mission is to overthrow global capitalism, imperialism, and landlordism, and to build a world socialist federation based on genuine equality, cooperation, and solidarity. You can read the full program online at communistusa.org/program. And yeah, that's that Star Trek future that we're working towards. Humanity united under one banner. So please like, share, and subscribe. And I will be back tomorrow with the same daily routine of martial arts, bodyweight exercises, workout, yoga, and then some reading and meditation at the end, which I just did a little reading, but I have to skip the full reading and meditation because I need to get some sleep before I work. So have a good one. Train hard. Get some.